Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are digging into one of the biggest, most fundamental questions in all of economics. Why are some countries so incredibly rich while others remain poor? We're going to investigate a really fascinating theory that says the answer isn't about geography or culture, but something called the rules of the game that were set up centuries and centuries ago. So, let's kick things off with a real head-scratcher. It's a puzzle that has kept historians and economists busy for decades, and they call it the reversal of fortune. And trust me, it's a super strange but incredibly powerful pattern you see all throughout world history. The evidence is just, well, it's stark. If you look back to the year 1500, places that were thriving and densely populated, like the lands of the Mughal Empire in India, or where the Aztecs and Incas were in the Americas, are today, relatively speaking, much poorer. And at the same time, places that were pretty sparsely populated and less developed back then, like North America, New Zealand, and Australia, are now some of the wealthiest nations on Earth. So how in the world did this massive flip happen? Okay, to solve this mystery, economists have kind of lined up four main suspects, the deep, fundamental causes that could possibly explain this huge reversal. So let's put on our detective hats and start examining the evidence for each one. All right, here's our lineup. The potential culprits are just simple luck or random chance. Then there's geography, the physical environment of a place. Third is culture, which covers all the societal values and beliefs. And finally, we have institutions, basically the human-made rules that shape a society. So, like any good detective, we've got to look at the evidence for each suspect. And when we really start digging in, we find that the cases against luck, geography, and even culture, well, they start to fall apart pretty quickly when you look at the historical facts. See, this is a really important point. We have to look deeper. Things like new technology, investing in factories, or having a more educated workforce, those aren't the root causes. As the economist Northen Thomas famously put it, those things are growth itself. We need to figure out what causes them to happen in the first place. First suspect up, geography. Now, the argument here is that some environments are just naturally better for economic success. You've probably heard these kinds of arguments before, right? Like Europe's jagged coastline and mountains created competition, which was good for growth, or that tropical climates, with all their diseases and tough farming conditions, just hold countries back. But the geography idea hits a massive wall, and that wall is the reversal of fortune itself. I mean, if tropical climates were just a permanent disadvantage, then why were so many of the most advanced societies of 1500 located right there? Geography is pretty constant, right? But the economies of these places changed dramatically. So geography can't be the main story here. Okay, so if geography is out, what about our next suspect, culture? The classic argument from Max Weber was that the Protestant work ethic is what really kicked off capitalism in Northern Europe. Others point to things like high social trust, which makes doing business a whole lot easier. So maybe some cultures are just better set up for economic success. But here again, we have this powerful real-world experiment that just blows that idea up. Just look at the Korean Peninsula. Before it was split up after World War II, it was one of the most culturally and ethnically similar places on the planet. People on both sides of that border today share the exact same geography, the same deep historical culture. The only major difference? Their institutions. And, well, the results just speak for themselves. So, if it's not geography and it's not culture, well, that leaves our last suspect standing, institutions. Let's see how this theory cracks the case wide open. So what in the world are institutions exactly? The best way to think about them is as the rules of the game. They're the laws, the constitutions, the regulations that a society creates. And this is the critical part. They determine the incentives for pretty much everything we do. Do the rules protect your private property, which encourages you to invest? Or do they let powerful people just take your wealth, which, discourages you from even trying? And the key clue to really understanding the power of these institutions comes from the colonial era. See, European colonization created this massive worldwide natural experiment. It wasn't the same everywhere. It set different parts of the world on profoundly different paths when it came to their rules of the game. So basically, colonizers set up two very different kinds of institutions. In places that were already wealthy and had big populations like Peru or India, they established what we call extractive institutions. The goal was super simple: plunder all the resources and exploit the huge local labor force. But in places that were poorer and had very few people, like the future United States or Canada, there wasn't really much to plunder.
So instead, settlers came to stay and work, and they demanded inclusive institutions that would protect their own property and their own freedoms.
And boom, this brilliantly explains the whole mystery. The places that started out rich got these extractive institutions that ended up choking off any chance of long-term growth. Meanwhile, the places that started out poor got inclusive institutions that encouraged investment and innovation. These paths, set centuries ago, basically determined their economic destinies. And there's some really solid evidence to back this up. Economists found a pretty clever, if grim, way to test this idea. They looked at the death rates of the first European settlers. In places where diseases made it really dangerous for Europeans to settle, like in parts of Africa, they had absolutely no reason to build a lasting society. They just set up these smash-and-grab extractive systems. But where the death rates were low, they settled down for good, and they built institutions to protect themselves and their property for the long haul. Now, this all leads to one final, really crucial question. If these extractive institutions are so obviously bad for a country's growth in the long run, why don't poor countries just, switch to good ones? Why do these bad patterns stick around for centuries?
The answer, and it's often a pretty brutal one, is that while these institutions are terrible for the country as a whole, they are extremely good for a small, powerful elite group that controls the government. And that elite group has absolutely zero interest in changing the rules that are making them rich and powerful. Yeah, this elite group will actually fight against changes that could bring prosperity to everyone. They'll block new technologies or prevent people from getting an education because those things could create new rivals, threatening their tight grip on power. It creates this vicious cycle of poverty and inequality that is just incredibly difficult to break out of. So the ultimate takeaway here is that whether a country's prosperous or not isn't just a matter of having the right resources or technology. At its heart, it's a political story. The real key to understanding global wealth and poverty is to always ask, who gets to make the rules? And maybe even more importantly, who benefits from keeping things exactly the way they are?